Ani, everyone. Aaron Bauerman, Indigenous, Shegwanda First Nation, Minwa Trona Donjaba. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to the fourth and final webinar of a four-part webinar series titled Indigenous Engagement and Innovation in HIV Prevention. This is a webinar series in partnership with the Ontario Aboriginal HIV/AIDS Strategy, Two-Spirited People of the First Nations, and CATIE. And before we begin, I would like to welcome our elder, Linda Barkman, to open us up in a good way. Welcome, Linda.
Oh, good afternoon on such a beautiful sunny day. It's so awesome to see so many people out that walk alongside us, and yeah, just a feeling, even though we're not with each other, it's just a feeling that I feel when I see everybody, because wow, it's just awesome to walk alongside people. So I've been doing smudging now for quite a while, and I've been doing with I see Megan has her smudge, and that's so awesome. But I've been doing with water. Water is the most sacred thing we have on this planet. The whole planet. This is the most sacred thing we have. I have heard one elder had said that we are below we're along with the mosquitoes fighting for clean water. So I asked the creator, what else can I use besides the smudging and the smoke, because I didn't feel like I was connecting with everybody. And as I was doing, I was asking, I was drinking some water, and then, like, this is the perfect thing that we can use, because like we said, it's sacred. So how I like to start is asking everybody to get some water, if we have some water. It could be from bottled water, from the sink, it doesn't matter. Water's water, it's sacred no matter how you get it, whether it's bought or whatever. But anyways, what we're gonna do is we're gonna pour just tiny a bit on your palm. And you're gonna smudge your hands together. And then you're gonna smudge your head, your eyes. So Creator, open my eyes so I can see the beauty in the world and not so much of the beauty. For that, we will fix me, Gwetch. Then you're going to smudge your ears and your mouth, and you're going to ask Creator, please let me open my ears so I could hear what is being said in your mouth, so that way you can be clear on what is you want the other person to hear. And then you're going to do it again. You're going to put a little bit in your palm of your hand again. You're going to smudge that, and this time you're going to do your shoulders, your arms, your heart, your stomach. And you're going to ask the Creator to take everything off of you and to reach your back. Take off things that I don't need to carry. Your heart, so that way you can release the love that you have so much of, because sometimes we just do a happy dance. Sometimes because we need to release that. And we gratitude, Creator, for our arms, that we can wrap people up with that when they need it. Man, sometimes you don't get a hug for days, but when you get that hug, me gratitude for that. And then you're gonna pour a little bit in your hand again, and this time, and then you're gonna smudge it. Then you're gonna smudge your legs. And some people like to do the bottom of their feet, because me gratitude, Creator, without them, we wouldn't be going anywhere. But even if we didn't have them, we'd still be going. So Miigwech, Creator, for that energy for us to go. And then this time, what you're going to do is that you're going to take a zip of it. And as you're taking a zip of it, you're going to thank Creator for everything you have, for the things you don't have. You're going to thank Creator for the past loves you have now, for the loves you have, and the loves you have now, and the loves you're going to have in the future. Because you know what? In 2 seconds from now, you're probably going to fall in love again, whatever kind of love that you have. So take a drink and say, Miigwech, Creator, for all these feelings that I have, that I can keep, that I can accept, and that I can give away. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Linda. It's very beautiful and a great way to include that really sacred medicine, Nibe. Okay, so I'm going to invite Megan Young, the Executive Director of Oahas, to give us a brief overview of how this all came to be. So Megan, welcome.
Ingoet Aaron, Bojo Genawea, Nigansit Nindishnakas, Misquadasina Dodem, Getchuikadong and Donjiba, Aurelianda. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I'm really glad to be here with all of my colleagues on the call today. As Aaron shared, this is the fourth part of the four-part webinar series, but the idea for this series really started back in 2021. The OHA staff were doing HIV training with CATIE, and it was through conversations in that training where staff here were looking for additional resources and supports specifically for Indigenous people who are looking to navigate services and access PrEP. And through those conversations, CATIE and OHA started looking at maybe having a single webinar in the fall of 2021. And it was through conversations with different colleagues, including Laura Liberty, who you'll hear from later, who really prompted the idea of how are we indigenizing this work and how are we decolonizing it, and what steps we need to take to really make it centered on our ways of knowing, being, and doing. And so it's through those conversations that we decided to take a step back and really look at how could we bring forward this work in a meaningful way. And it was at that time that Oahas, CATIE, and Two-Spirit people of the First Nations started to have conversations, and we decided that we would have a four-part webinar series. So back in June of 2022, we launched the webinar series with our first webinar, and it was focused on engaging an Indigenous-centered dialogue on decolonizing and reclaiming sexuality and sexual health. And the webinar was called Reclaiming Indigenous Sexual Health as Good Medicine, Indigenous Self-Determination as HIV Prevention. And in that series, in that webinar, we really looked at the impacts of colonization and what that's done to our sexual health and our ability to have conversations around sexual health and sexuality. And we also looked at what we were really excited about going forward. So what were those pieces that we wanted to reclaim, and how were we going to do this through self-determination, and what did youth have to say, and where did youth want to see the conversations going as we move forward? So if you haven't had a chance to view that, please check it out. It's on CATIE's past webinars. And then in September, we looked at our second webinar, and in that, we really focused on increasing our understanding and knowledge of the biomedical knowledge of highly effective HIV prevention technologies. So that webinar was called Decolonizing HIV Prevention for Two-Eyed Seeing. And we really got into what is PrEP, what is PEP, what is PEP in pocket, what does U equals U mean? And so we heard from a number of amazing panelists who shared their knowledge with us. And then in our third webinar, which was Supporting Pathways to HIV Prevention and Wellness, we looked at what are the pathways that are available in an Ontario context. So we heard from an infectious disease doctor and nurse practitioners who had been doing work in HIV treatment and prevention for a long time, and we're looking at, had done work to start like PrEP clinics in Northern Ontario and things like that. So they really help ground us and make us aware of where we are today in Ontario and where we can go, the possibility, and how we can continue to pick up this work and move it forward within community. And that brings us to where we are today. And I'm really excited to hear from all the panelists who are so gracious in sharing their knowledge around community readiness and approaches for engagement in these important conversations. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Aaron.
Megan. So yeah, I'm going to speak for a little bit. Just going to give a brief outline of the agenda today. So we're going to talk a quick recap on HIV prevention strategies that we've spoke about in the past. Then we're going to have about a 40-minute panel discussion with our panelists. and then we'll come back to questions from audience. A bit of housekeeping. We're on Zoom. Things can happen. If we run into any issues, we'll just try to deal with it as we can. Bear with us and we'll come back. On the bottom of your Zoom screens, you should have a chat function. Use that to introduce yourself, say hi, share some love with our panelists and things like that. Share links for appropriate information. And then beside it, there should be a Q&A button, and we'll use that one specifically for questions. And hopefully we will have time to get to most of them at the end of our discussion. So as Megan mentioned, we had 3 webinars so far, and this is our final one. So I just want to give a bit of a background on what we're going to be touching on today. So with that, we all know that there's been advances in HIV prevention, such as Western biomedical tools as PrEP and PEP, as well as knowledge that people living with HIV who are on treatment and have a suppressed viral load cannot pass on HIV to their sexual partners. And this means that we have the power to significantly change the pace of the pandemic and outcomes for our communities. So to reach Indigenous communities, Indigenous leaders across Ontario are leading ways in weaving these 2 knowledges together with the biomedical and Indigenous ways of knowing. And hopefully, we can make some really significant impacts on HIV transmission and HIV stigma among our Indigenous communities. So while existing pathways for prevention are limited, for some Indigenous communities in Ontario, leaders are engaging communities and increasing awareness of options for HIV prevention and the need for advocacy for better access. These efforts are really critical to making a significant impact on HIV transmission and stigma. So this webinar, we're going to explore examples of Indigenous leadership and innovation in community engagement and awareness raising with a real focus on HIV prevention and sexual health knowledge. So I'm going to just really briefly touch base on the 4 highly effective HIV prevention strategies. We had these presentations, Katie's done presentations in the past, and so I'm just going to touch really quickly on what these are. So we are talking about prevention strategies in the context of sex as opposed to other forms of transmission. So we do know that HIV can be passed through sex, but there are ways to protect ourselves and our sexual partners. And first being the traditional condoms and lube. If used properly, it's very effective for preventing HIV. You use a new condom every time that you have sex with a partner, and using water and silicone-based lubes, because who doesn't like a healthy amount of lubrication during sex, right? HIV treatment. So HIV treatment is first and foremost about the health and well-being of a person living with HIV, and we know that with successful HIV treatment, a person can live a long and healthy life. But we also know that HIV treatment is the second most highly effective prevention strategy. So when a person is on HIV treatment and has a suppressed viral load, they cannot pass on HIV through sex. And sometimes this is referred to as undetectable equals untransmittable, or U equals U. PrEP is a third highly effective strategy. This is if a person is HIV negative and at a higher risk for HIV, they might be a good candidate for PrEP, which is a pre-exposure prophylaxis medication. PrEP involves HIV negative person taking a 1-a-day pill, which helps reduce the risk of getting HIV. And a person starts PrEP before they're exposed to HIV. And lastly, we have PEP, sorry. And PEP is an HIV negative person who has been exposed to HIV. They take PEP as a post-exposure prophylaxis for 28 days. And this drug is started as soon as possible or within a 72-hour period of being exposed. And I believe Katie is putting this information into the chat. So if you're interested in learning more, it's there. You could also visit the Katie website, and they have a ton of knowledge on there as well. So yeah, so I am going to stop talking so much, and I really just want to pass it over and get into the fun part of hearing from our panelists. So first, I'd like to just ask you all to introduce yourselves, maybe your name, where you work, any titles or identities you may hold, and yeah. And I'll just start at the top of my list here, and I have Melissa Morris at the beginning, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, Tansy. I'm Melissa Morris. I'm coming from Treaty 1 in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I'm Manitoba Métis on my mother's side and Jewish on my father's. I work as the Manitoba Community Coordinator for the Winneska Center for Indigenous STVBI Research, and I work through their community partner, Gani Kanichuk, here in Winnipeg. I identify as queer, two-spirit, I'm pansexual, and I'm also a person that lives with HIV, and I've been living with HIV for 15 years.
Miigwech, Melissa. Jack, can I invite you to introduce yourself?
Anse Gakio, Gaintoxa and Sigasun, Equimuscochisik, Nitsun. My name is Jack Saddleback. I go by he, him pronouns. I'm originally from the Sampson Cree Nation in Musqueam, Alberta, which is just an hour south of Edmonton, but I'm still on Treaty 6 territory in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. I'm an out and proud, deadly Cree, two-spirit, trans, gay man, and I've been with my partner for 11 years now. That being said, I'm also here representing Justice Trans, which is a national organization that creates accessible legal and justice information for two-spirit, trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming individuals, as I'm the current director of programming. Thanks.
Wonderful. Miigwech, Jack. Thank you for all the work you're doing. And I can pass it to the lovely Jordy. Can you introduce yourself?
Jordy my English name is Jordy Arnsar. I use he, they pronouns. I as well am a two-spirit Nakota Oyate and registered member of Carry the Kettle First Nation in Treaty 4, Saskatchewan. But I am currently living in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan as well in Treaty 6 territories. And I'm here today as the Community Readiness Coordinator for CAN's Community Alliances and Networks. Thank you.
Miigwech, Jordy. Laverne, welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself?
For sure. Nibuzu, Wambadi Studio, Debo Makwana Dodem, Treaty 1 the Doji. So my English name is Laverne Gervais. I'm here in Treaty 1 territory. I'm Anishinaabe, Dakota. I'm French Canadian, and I do identify as bisexual and two-spirit. My background is as a sexuality educator. I've done that for many years. I'm also a researcher in Indigenous women's health in particular. And I'm here at Gani Kanichuk as the project manager for the Minopamatswin Sexual Wellness Lodge. And yeah, I hold a lot of different hats, but that's the one I'm wearing today. So lovely to meet you all. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Laverne. Pleasure to meet you. And last but not least, Laura, may I welcome you into the circle, please?
Bonjour, Nindawe Marganidok, now Gobble Quay Indigenous cause. Wabjashi no dem, Nabising, Donjaba, Nishnabak Nation Wenjbayan, Nishomade Quayendao, Anishinaabe Quayendao Gaming. My Anishinaabe Nosewin is Laura Liberty. My traditional name is Standing at the Center. I'm a Martin clan. I live in North Bay. I work at Anishinaabe Nation in Nipissing. I'm second degree Medewin. And I am working here on Robinson Huron Treaty Territory. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Laura. And to miigwech to everyone for joining us today. We're very aware of all the hard work and love that goes into doing this type of work alongside communities. So we're really happy you could take the time today. So yeah, so we'd like to start off with grounding ourselves in community readiness. We learned in previous webinars that PrEP and U equals U and what access to HIV prevention tools look like in Indigenous communities. So we really just want to welcome Jordy and start from the beginning. So Jordy, if you can give us a brief rundown of what community readiness means and why is this important?
Yeah, thank you. So when we look at HIV and we look at messaging around PrEP, PEP, U equals U, so on and so forth, the education and advocacy around STBBI communities all across these lands are at different stages of readiness when it comes to implementing programs and services and resources around these issues and around these topics. And this readiness is a major factor of whether local initiatives can be effectively implemented, but most importantly, supported by the community. So the community readiness model was developed to serve sort of as a needs assessment, but also a practical tool to help communities mobilize for change. And the model that I work with kind of does this by defining 9 different stages in a community, ranging from no awareness to a high level of community ownership in response to the issue at hand. And in today's case, it would be HIV within communities. So we figure out what the stage of readiness is by using key respondent interviews. Although I had a discussion with some folks at CATIE around this, and I was saying that over the past couple of weeks, month or so, I've been really looking at this model from my perspective as an Nakota person, as an Indigenous person, and kind of changing how we speak about this model and changing how we speak about the work that we do in community. So instead of key respondent interviews, I like to say just community conversations. I want the work that we do in community to feel as if that you're sitting at the table with Mikushi or Inanna, our aunties, our grandmothers, and having these conversations in that way. But anyways, as I get myself distracted here. So these community conversations are a set of questions that look at 6 different dimensions or areas within a community. And then through these conversations, we are able to kind of put a level of readiness to each of these dimensions in the community, and from there create a plan that is very local, very specific, and culturally appropriate for the community. So in a nutshell, all that to say, that's what the community readiness model is, and it's imperative that we meet the community where they're at in order to move forward. So my job as a community readiness coordinator at CAN is to walk alongside these communities to help them assess their level of readiness and create a plan that's not too high of a level or too ambitious to the point where the initiatives become discouraging, but high enough of a level where we're still challenging community members to advance their knowledge on the issue at hand.
Go ahead, Jordy. I have a couple other questions. So I'm wondering if you might be able to walk us through like an example of how you've seen community readiness used in a community, and maybe like what is a question or issue you've seen emerged, and how did they apply the community readiness model to move forward with engaging in HIV prevention work or raising awareness about HIV in that community?
Yeah, thank you. So I've been in this role for just over a year. So I have worked with several communities so far, which has been very just wonderful. I really love working with this model. It's very, to me, I bring that kind of like grassroots perspective because I'm always going to be that girl. And so for me, I love it. But that being said, it does take about a year for these communities to kind of evaluate their work and move on to the kind of, essentially with this model, the point is kind of baby steps. So we're at this stage and then let's get to this stage. And then there's a new work plan kind of associated with that, right? So haven't got to the evaluation stage yet, but one thing that I would like to share as it pertains to this question is 2 of the communities that I've worked with this year or during this past year have worked with a community readiness model before, and I've had discussions with them because myself too, I was curious of how that change that was seen. And something that one of the communities had mentioned to me, which was really great, is simply by using the model, like simply just by implementing the model, they already seen that change happen in community within that first year. Because one thing that I really stress is for us working in this field is to think about who is the end user, who are the people that we are trying to serve, that we are trying to help, and ensuring that those same people are involved in the process. It's very much that nothing about us without us kind of perspective, right? So once we have community members at large coming in and helping with the planning, helping with the strategies, then and it not being run by folks like me or folks who work in the community, then while they're going through that process, they're learning, they're growing. And because they now have that community buy-in, they're going to go talk about it with their cousins and their friends and all of that in the community, or, you know, we like to talk in community. So just by getting them engaged in the process, we're already we're building that knowledge, and then they're sharing it with others. And that's the first stage of readiness. That's kind of the first thing we look at is starting with just having these conversations in communities. If people feel like HIV isn't an issue in their community, are having that kind of no awareness level, it starts by simply having these conversations. And that happens when we include people in our work.
Go ahead. I have one more question. So when you think about making change in communities through action and implement learnings, what do you see is currently working?
The end goal for the community readiness model, or the end goal for my work, is really about creating stage appropriate, culturally relevant, I know we use that term a lot, but initiatives, right? So one of the things that I've learned throughout this past year, I remember when I was really deep diving and, like I mentioned, like kind of looking at a different perspective at this model, I spoke with one of my colleagues. Oh my gosh, brain fart, sorry. I spoke with one of my colleagues, and we were talking about the accessibility of the language. Carrie Lynn Lund, sorry, that's who I was speaking with. And Carrie Lynn had mentioned to me, you know, Jordy, when you go about your working community, think about it as we need to speak with people like it's maybe like a 5th grade level language, because when we get caught up in the work that we're doing, you know, all of these acronyms that we work with, STBBI, you know, 2S LGBTQIA, to us it makes sense, but we can't assume that for everybody else. And when we speak about U equals U, we can't assume that people are going to know right away what that means, because within that messaging of U equals U, we're talking about undetectable viral loads, we're talking about adherence to ARTs, we're talking about transmission of HIV. And just simply with that alone, I can assume that if I go into my community of Carry the Kettle, if I give them the, you know, the definition of U equals U, they're going to have follow-up questions. And that's really what this comes down to, is accessibility, keeping our language accessible, keeping it very easy to understand. And I think so when it comes to what I've learned from community readiness and working with this and working in community, again, that's a big part of meeting community where they're at, is not assuming that everybody comes with the same knowledge, and kind of figuring out where they're at with their knowledge, and then like building from there.
Miigwech for that, Jordy. Yeah, it reminds me of like when we first started doing this project, our first webinar, when we were planning it, we realized we were starting a lot further than we should have, and we had to really bring it back and just talk about the most basic things, and that's sex, right? Like being comfortable with talking about sex and blowjobs, and you know, I always remember Linda talking about blowjobs, like, or tricking. So it's
Yeah.
great to like have these conversations and remember that this is a day-to-day thing for us.
Yeah, and that's a really I'm happy you brought that up, and I'll just kind of wrap up what I'm saying with that is, you know, in our, I'll just speak from personal experience. When working in communities, in remote communities, in reserves, or these small Métis villages, we do have to understand that, you know, I have the privilege of living in a city. So these conversations are very typical for me. And with the field of work that I do, these conversations are very typical to me. But in some communities, that shame around sex and that stigma around sex is still very prevalent, not just like gay, bi men who have sex with men, but just sex in general. So if we are going into community and trying to talk to, you know, the knowledge carriers, trying to talk to the aunties in the community, and they get all shy and like quiet about sex, how are we supposed to talk about STBBI if we can't even talk about kind of that mode of transmission, right? So that's really something that I think about often, and again, why I really like working with the community readiness model, because we can kind of gauge that and work from there.
Glad, Jordy. So Melissa, I have a question for you, if you wouldn't mind. I'm just curious. So, how does what you heard from Jordy and what community readiness means? How does this resonate with you?
Yeah, so building off of what Jordy was saying, most recently I developed a very basic HIV 101 presentation that, you know, has stuff from CATIE, but it's very basic, doesn't have a lot of fancy language in it. And I also, in presenting it, I offer my lived experience in it. So I've done a couple of presentations with it, and the level, like, it can really work well with different levels of STBBI knowledge. I did it with the first time with a mixed knowledge level, and great conversation stemmed from that. And the second time I did it with a more knowledgeable crew, but that crowd was a little bit, they weren't as open into talking about sexuality and sex as the first group. So I really was able to kind of gauge about how much I'm going to talk explicitly about sexual transmission, or am I going to focus on more on that U equals U? But I definitely think there is a huge advantage to being able to model that I'm a confident person that lives with HIV, and to be able to present this knowledge as a person with living with HIV who's confident is a successful strategy in my mind.
Absolutely, I agree. Laverne, if I can ask you, just how do you engage with communities around a topic that is, you know, related to sex or sexual health, and is community readiness a consideration or a factor in the work that you do?
It is for sure. Just to jump off a little from what Jordy and Melissa were sharing, as when we asked earlier, like titles that we share, one title I've always appreciated more than any was facilitator and coordinator, because oftentimes when you are walking into these spaces, there's such a wealth of knowledge, but because we don't generally have safe spaces to share topics like sex and sexuality, we don't know what we're sitting with. And so if we just facilitate a good discussion to come up, some of that knowledge comes up and it presents itself. And then my job is just to throw in a little bit more maybe of education part I have, a little bit more knowledge that I've had from years of spending going to these conferences and doing all of this other educational stuff, because there is such a wealth of knowledge. And what we've, in terms of community readiness, not community readiness, sorry, but in terms of working with communities and in that way too, is just really getting to know people, right? Not walking in with that Western education model of like everybody here sitting here is an empty vessel and I am going to fill them with all the knowledge they need to live the best life that they can live. And instead look at it from that Minalpamactisuan model of looking at, we're all seeking the good life as an Indigenous people. We come with a wealth of education, and we had tools and techniques in our ways of doing these things that just need space to be revived and to grow, instead of being shut down by a Western model that really feels it does know everything. And so how you do that, and then yeah, like being able to set spaces that for folks with your own people in a way, so you're also aware of, like, on the one hand we have great humor and laughter, but we have such a history of shame and abuse and violence, and how we navigate those in a way that is gentle, that is loving, that is empowering and safe can only be done, well, in my mind, can only be done by another Indigenous person in those circles. So in assessing like where community is at, there's so much we don't know. And one of the things we did at the Lodge is we implemented an initiative called the respondent-driven sampling. And we did it as a way, we were hoping to look at addressing things like contact tracing. So somebody comes in, they get tested, and then we find out who their party of people are. And we were hoping, as it was also a tool for us to incentivize people, to encourage them to come in and get tested, and to engage with healthcare, because we have a lot of folks in our communities who have no interest in engaging with the healthcare. No matter how bad all these stats are, all of us working in this field are concerned about. No, we have a long history. That's the impact of a long history of violence and colonization and stigma and shame. And so how, even for those of us as Indigenous people working in the field, how do we engage and encourage people to take advantage of the healthcare that is available to them? And it is challenging. So we send up this respondent-driven sampling as a way to bring people in to do a survey and give them money. Like, just come in and we'll give you money. And we took that time to make a survey that was probably the first time a lot of people had been asked questions that had to do with sex and sexuality and their sexual health and history. So a lot of our folks who are aunties who delivered those surveys for folks were getting that really unique opportunity to develop a sort of intimate connection with somebody in a caring way that speaks to the heart of who they are. And we were able to gather that information and kind of get a sense of like, okay, where are people at? Because we talk in our field about like condoms and these prevention tools, which are great prevention tools, but they're only a tiny portion of probably a myriad of other tools, including, like use condoms, but how many of our people or folks, not just our people, folks in general, don't like to use them and won't. So it's like, oh yeah, condoms are great. And then they toss it to the side and we push out all these free condoms and we really don't know who's using them or what. So like one of the approaches we try to take at the lodges is, like, what ones do people like? Like, give us your feedback, or one's better than the other, and people come back and will tell us, we like the larger sizes, or we need one that's a little more snug, or God, I love the ones that glow in the dark. Like really communicating to get a better sense of what people enjoy. Focusing on pleasure and that aspect, as opposed to the fear model that we kind of get pushed into sometimes at looking at, let's make sure everybody wears, use a condom, you're all going to die because of the virus. Like, we try to resist that box, and it's hard. But to take that approach where, folks are coming in and we're able to have our relatives are coming in and have those conversations, to be prepared. And those conversations sometimes though come too with some heavy pain and history, and some of them is just lots of laughter and curiosity. In the survey, one of the highlights, even though it didn't quite function as we had intended it, the outcome was still really awesome. And one of the things, as an educator, a sexual health worker, is that we had a large, almost more than half were cis hetero Indigenous men that filled out the survey, which is a voiceless body in this work. And then they came in, and then we had, for example, like an uncle who would come in and he would just visit and have a cup of coffee and do some coloring or whatever we had going on. And then he started to bring his nieces and nephews, and everybody else started to come in from his family, and he was just bringing them in and sending them off to the nurse. And we didn't really have to do anything but be there and provide the space help facilitate that action to happen. And yeah, it was beautiful to see. We loved it. We enjoyed it. But it's really, and at the end of the day, we now have a bit of a better picture too from our own data of what's happening in our community. We have our information for our community, not just the national or even the provincial, like for our community. And to us, that's a blessing. That's a beautiful, beautiful blessing to have that opportunity to talk to our people on topics that a lot of us just enjoy talking about. We never get the space to sit around and talk about, well, maybe you don't ejaculate inside, ejaculate on their back or do something else, right? Like if you don't want to use the condom, like push those narratives, push those things further. And then also, smudge and have a ceremony, sing a song at the drum, have a good, like just incorporate all of our life into that setting, as opposed to just being a body in a game of viruses and whatnot. So.
Great for that, Laverne. And yeah, and I mean, sex is sacred, right? It's definitely, when you were speaking, that's what was coming to my mind. It's something that we have to bring back in a good way to our circles. Laura, I can ask you a very similar question. How do you consider community readiness in the work that you do in Northern Ontario?
Well, as an HIV coordinator for 39 First Nations, I'm really dependent on the workers who are entrenched and working in the communities to take the lead to determine where the community is at regarding HIV and sexual health education. I try not to be that person to provide that education because I'm not an expert, but also I prefer to give the capacity to the workers to be able to share that information. And when I offer programming, I always come at it from an Anishinaabeg viewpoint where I include the education, but the culture is the main component, as opposed to adding culture to the education. Using our traditional teachings and the lost art of visiting and Wachwewag, I like to encourage the people to come together in a non-threatening format by having visiting sessions where we always are sharing our gifts and our talents of creativity. And we're doing whole body work where we're using our hands and we're creating something as we're having that discussion over tea or over, tea and bannock or whatever it is. But I find that setting up an environment where people feel really comfortable is key, and ensuring that culture is the main focal point of programming is also really, really important. So once I depend on workers to invite me to come to communities, and once that invitation is extended, then it's really the workers that have to identify what the ask is.
Laura. I think we all agree with you that culture is super important in almost anything that we do today, and having these champions in our community is extremely important, including our younger generations, right? We need people to uptake this work in sexual health, and yeah, so I appreciate you sharing what you're doing in community. Jack, if I may come to you. So, I'm sure most of us are aware of all the great work you're doing in your province, and even on this side of the country, we're still very aware and see a lot going on. So I'm just wondering, is the concept of community readiness important to consider when leveraging social media to increase awareness of HIV and sexual health?
Certainly, the aspect of community readiness when putting out social media messaging, it's vital to know where the conversation is currently taking place within the communities. It's vital to be able to have conversations that are accessible, that are like eye-catchy. I think the interesting thing about social media, and many of us within the room here understand that it is both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing in being able to reach a wide array of individuals, but it's also a curse when we have algorithms that may silo some of our work into preaching to the choir, pretty much. When looking at being able to push the molds, however, I think some of the biggest uptakes that we see are having, as was shared here, having those role models within community speak up and speak out, being able to go into some of the communities that I've had the good grace of working with, and speaking with some of their elders to be able to potentially get some feedback of like, is this good? Is it too saucy? Are people going to giggle too much? Is it really hitting home for individuals? Such as Laverne's comment about talking with folks and actually saying the words. And then potentially also like recording these elders and these conversations between maybe some intergenerational individuals. I know I've had some very excellent conversations with my own elders who taught me a thing or two about how much I can actually blush when they talk about sexual health and about sexual practices. But how can we create these further scenarios for other communities to have conversations within their own spaces, so people in their communities are wanting and able, or a little bit more invested in these situations? So community readiness in this conversation is fascinating. I think coming now, I think I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Switching gears to more of legal and accessible aspects of our abilities to push for proper healthcare, adequate healthcare, I think is one of the larger conversations that have just kind of been on the fringes here. We know that we have access through non-insured health benefits for a number of things, but how are we getting this information then out to community to ensure that we are pressuring the federal government and other decision-making bodies to ensure that we are getting proper healthcare in our own home communities? That is top priority for many of us in this type of work here. And I think we have such opportunity within social media to create bite-sized accessible information for people to then utilize that and put pressure on their own chief and council, on their own healthcare centers, on their own interactions with the government. So with that being said, I'm going to hit pause right there, as I know that we have some Q&A coming in here, and I'd love to hear some more spicy comments from my fellow panelists.
Miigwech, Jack. Yeah, so I kind of wanted to turn it so it gets a little more practical, things that are happening in community that you're all doing. So if I can start with you, Laura. How are you approaching the need for knowledge on HIV prevention in communities you work with? And how do you do HIV education on the ground?
Again, I encourage the workers take the lead on this, but I encourage them to access traditional resources and traditional people and build education around that. So I think anytime there's a gathering, there should be education, particularly at bingos, the largest gathering in our communities. It's not hard to do a bite-size info package to get the word out. But I started also encouraging and being in attendance at events like round dances and powwows, and sharing information via a booth, health booth, and also Little NHL, for example. I went through the crowd and just started distributing condoms, and it generated so many hilarious conversations. And I think it's just a great approach to be among people, rubbing shoulders with people, and just sharing information. But I think also it's how you do it, using a sense of humor with like my program created designer condoms that have been quite popular among the youth. They use them as collector items, and I think we have to infuse and ensure that our language is always at the forefront of everything that we're doing, because all of our teachings and all of our knowledge is rooted in our language. So I try to keep that in mind when I'm doing programming with communities.
I'd like to ask Laverne and Melissa a similar question. Maybe I'll start with you, Melissa. So just wanting to know how you're doing the work on the ground to help raise awareness of HIV and sexual health issues.
Yeah, so like I said, I formulated the HIV 101 presentation or workshop. It's not a presentation, it's a workshop, which I really personalized to my lived experience. But I also worked as a child and youth care in CFS group homes for a while, and so modeling, having that bowl of condoms ready to go on a Friday night, and making sure the youth are ready and open to have these conversations, and just normalizing talking about sex with our youth. I think if we really want to make a change, we need to start with our youth, but we also need to educate our elders, and working with those two, we can really revolutionize sexual health, because that's really what we need, is a sexual health revolution. So definitely opening up conversations. I like to educate people in my everyday life too. Most recently, I was reading my social work textbook, and it was appalling that they only referred to HIV as AIDS. So this is an American textbook, and this is what they're teaching social work students. So I made a point of pointing that out in class, and we had a half-an-hour conversation about HIV and sexual health. So yeah, I love opening up conversations in everyday transactions as well.
Laverne, how are you approaching the need for knowledge in sexual health and HIV in your community?
We've been doing it over the years now at Ganigunichik in a number of ways. We've focused for a while on women living with HIV, and engaging women to do different activities, often led by other Indigenous women that are living with the virus. And there's a lot of art-based work. So a lot of art-based, for example, few years ago, it came out that when we gathered a group of women together from the newcomer community and from the Indigenous community together, it came out that a lot of folks were still experiencing a lack of education on HIV, and experiencing that they were ostracized at family gatherings. So they were placed, they were either given disposable cutlery and plates, or other forms of just kind of by the rest of the family that this lack of understanding that HIV isn't transmitted through plates and using forks and knives. And hearing that that's where we're at in this day and age was really heartbreaking. So the women came together, and we designed plates and our own medicine feast bundles, so that women could take a feast bundle of their own, one with messages of love and reaffirming that there's a community that loves and supports them and knows better than this, and that they had that opportunity to take these kinds of tools into their family environments and use it as a tool for education. And similar to, like, it's like we do it at any level. It's grabbing an opportunity. So we have like kukums, grandmothers on site, and working to educate them on bringing everybody into the discussion, and not just specific folks, bringing everybody into it. And we have some folks, especially in the older elders, who are really keen. They're really keen to learn, and they're really keen to be a part of caring for the community in that way and understanding how to do it. And then we have, I guess, not assuming that just because folks like maybe youth in particular get more access to some of this education, we don't assume, because a lot of them are not getting education in the traditional routes. So we just try to encourage like that intergenerational tables are happening, and we have the best laughter from it. We have brave folks who are not afraid to make chocolate vulvas and penises and display them. They're not afraid to make mistakes and, misuse Uncle Slayer and Auntie Slayer or DTF, and have a really good laugh And it's so wonderful to see the youth being able to recognize these older individuals as having that capacity. So that's kind of how we do. We've done a number of, we looked at criminalization issue and understanding how that doesn't work as a health tool. We've done a lot of things over the years on educating it on HIV, but our focus now really more is on that overall reaffirming sex positive need in our community and space.
You go ahead. I have just a follow-up question. I mean, you mentioned a bit earlier the difficulties of engaging men, and we know that your organization serves women, but you also work really hard to engage those different genders. And I'm just wondering how you approach that in doing so.
We've done it first. Yeah, we have. Ganiganichik is well known for our work with women or female identified and two-spirit folks, and not so much for cis hetero men, adult men. For youth, yes, but not for adult men. So at the lodge, we have a number of grandmothers or kukums and aunties. And so we've been working on how to engage more and more uncles, and they kind of show themselves a little bit. They kind of, the brave individuals who will show up and in a room full of women and just kind of, if they don't panic and run, they sit down and get comfortable and learn how to be in that space in a safe way. And we do our best to encourage and support, but really we just, yeah, we've looked at different ways to engage folks. A lot of people have been joining our pipe ceremonies. We have monthly pipe ceremonies, and we have a lot of men that show up for those to sit with us and be a part of the community. So, which is great.
You go ahead. Jack, if I can turn it back to you and maybe just to talk a little bit more about the role that social media plays and like what we might consider social media as an engagement tool and why this is important. And maybe if you see any parallels between online engagement and in-person engagement and how we can really leverage these things to reach people in our communities.
Certainly. How about I'll start with some in-person engagement and speak about some of my past roles that I've had. Such as the cultural and projects coordinator with Out Saskatoon. So I did all of our cultural programming. So this includes the establishment of round dances, sweats, pipe ceremonies, the establishment of our Two-Spirit powwow, which had ran for 2 years until unfortunately the panini came in. But regardless, at these particular cultural instances, or events, ceremonies, places, the conversation of sexual health and being open and honest about that was always top and forefront, because as was shared here, anytime we gather, there's an opportunity for learning. There's an opportunity for us to further our knowledge collectively a little bit more. So at the Two-Spirit powwow, for example, sometimes when we were on the mic, you know, I'd kind of slide the announcers or the MCs a little bit of information to be able to go over as they were talking to folks, the infection rates or prevention aspects, as well to highlight some of the booths, as I believe Laura was sharing, some of the booths that were happening at the powwow. So we had Saskatoon Sexual Health show up and give demonstrations about, like, here's a condom, here's what PrEP is like, here's what PEP is like. So being able to have those conversations on an in-person situation help to create community knowledge and that community readiness and community capacity. But I think it also built confidence within folks who are maybe engaging with this for the first time. But to engage with it in such like a meaningful and deeper sense that, wow, my Indigenous community, my larger community as a whole, wants to talk about this and wants the well-being of my whole body to be good. So I think having these conversations in those particular cultural spaces is vital, and it shouldn't just, I suppose, sit on our shoulders as people who engage with sexual health education and information. This should actually also be on the shoulders of our leaders, our chief and council. It should be on the shoulders of, you know, maybe even folks who are putting on conferences. But, you know, that's preaching to the choir. I think Chief and Council has a lot of opportunity. In fact, they have a lot of responsibility to be able to step up in these situations, because they, and us as a whole, Indigenous communities, are having to push back against these colonial narratives that have taught us to shy away from sexual health conversations because of the long-lasting and intergenerational abuses many of our kin have had to deal with. So when I'm looking at like in person, that's able to like create that nice, fun environment where people can just go and joke and laugh, because that's definitely a part of many of our communities, is to, you know, when something feels a little uncomfortable, you just laugh at it. You make a joke, right? Now, when it comes to social media, I think there's some fascinating things that can be done. I'm actually just going to share a quick little news article. Now, this news article comes back from 2017, where now it's called Prairie Harm Reduction, but back in 2017, it was called AIDS Saskatoon. AIDS Saskatoon had done an initiative to create condoms that had Indigenous language on the actual condoms themselves. Now, number one, it was fun to be able to hear about these and to help get the message out there. But number two, we were able to look at social media as a tool to create some fun, inviting situations for people around condom use. But as we know, that's only one instance of prevention or safer sex practices, as we hear. But it did offer us an avenue to then start talking a little bit wider. You know, let's start talking about instances of, you know, what lube to use. Let's start talking about instances of like, what does HCV look like? What does HPV look like? What are all of these things that are happening within the human body that need to be talked about when we're looking at sexual health practices or physical practices or snagging practices, as we have. So when looking at social media, it's endless, if I may say. But one of the things that I find most recently is that we need to be able to have those snippets to be able to get the information out there. But we need individuals who are willing and able to speak up and put their voice out there and put their face out there. And this could be any sort of person. This can be any person within Indigenous community, even like the Cookums, as we're hearing here, even the Muslims. You know, I think it's important that we start engaging them within these situations and talks, and just get the message out there. So a lot of things that can take place, a lot of great things. When it comes to just another quick little pivot here, when it comes to public legal education information, this is an area of work that is definitely needing a little bit more TLC, specifically around some of the nuances that we've been able to share here. But I think we're getting there. And I think all of us within this room here, we know the path that we need to be able to start forging forward and pushing back against these colonial healthcare systems that created so many barriers, and these colonial education systems that create further barriers. But needless to say, we're getting pretty good at being able to walk those walks and talk those talks. So as we move forward, I'm looking forward to seeing more.
Thank you very much, Jack. So I guess I just have a couple more questions for everyone. I'm gonna change gears a little bit, and maybe I'll start with Laverne. And I just wanted to ask you, how have you or your team developed your own comfort in talking about sex, sexuality, sexual wellness? Yeah, any thoughts on that? I believe you're still muted.
There you go. We've done it in a few ways. So at the Lodge, what we've set up is in acknowledging that in healthcare, there's things like burnout that often happen for a lot of folks that are working in healthcare. And as Indigenous people delivering these services, a lot of us are coming in with the same sort of issues of folks that are coming into our access our service. So we set up sharing circles every day. We start our day before Lodge in circle. And it's our opportunity to just share whatever is in our heart, to set our intention for the day. And it's an opportunity for us to talk about and develop our way of communicating with each other and building that trust, to share what's happening in our own lives, what's happening in our dating life or our sex life or with our body or with our health, and having that space to do that. And then being ready when folks come in. And for folks coming in, you know, we also do, like, we've engaged sexologists or sex therapists to come in and help facilitate, to look at that broader topic of sexuality and how it develops through our age. Because as a sexuality educator, I say a lot of us did not get access to this education beyond a classroom. Maybe one day when somebody pushed a projector into the schoolroom, a classroom, and showed us body parts and how babies are made, kind of vaguely how babies are made. But otherwise, we've not had grown up with that education. So we try to incorporate it into our site. So we've had, chances to talk about our own histories, but our own biases, to reflect on them, to really come in with that old sexuality kind of educator format of don't yuck somebody else's yum, right? And encouraging people to look out into the community at what's happening, from slut slams or smut slams to Bannock babes and drag shows and all of the beautiful things that are happening in the community, to engage in that. But so that's kind of how we support each other and look at and that includes people exploring their gender, people trying to get a better understanding of which box they fit in, whether it's bisexual, gay, pan, whatever little box they feel comfortable in at that day. And just, kind of combining education for ourselves as much as we can, because it's been missed. So that's one of the parts I love doing. So even as Jack was talking about social media, one of the things we did in our Go Ask Auntie campaign that's online was May is Masturbation Month. And so we have a group that works for us, and they came down, and one of the areas we wanted them to focus on are the myths about masturbation, right? And there are a lot, like that my body isn't my own, it's somebody else's. So if I masturbate, I'm cheating, or that it's dirty, or that it's something shameful. And so the team that we're working with came and sat with ours, and we talked about looking at, explore not only the myths, but what are great ways. Like lube is wonderful. I don't know why we give it away in tiny little packets, right? We should be giving bottles out, So we're able to have some of those discussions through that, and how we engage our social media, and also with each other. And it's a lot of just building trust with each other, as much as we want that trust and respect to be given to folks that are coming in. So we have to start with ourselves. All of us, we recognize that we start with ourselves as individuals and as a team that's working to do this work supportively. So.
Wonderful. Thank you, Laverne. See, I must have knew it was Masturbation Month. Just kidding. And I was also thinking, all the sexual health conversations I remember having. Does anyone remember Sue Johansson? She was so great. It's like older woman talking about sex and masturbation and blowjobs. It was great. I miss her.
Yeah. Sorry,
Jordy,
I was gonna jump in just to break the cycle a little, just because I don't know, maybe that's my shit disturber title. But yeah, laughter is such an important part, but also, I think everybody here too, sometimes you just have to treat it as like the most banal, normal subject on the planet when you're talking about it, because it is. It's not a big deal, but yet people, and I get it. People, it's a giggle, you're shy. It's such an exciting topic or a shameful topic, but for the rest of us, sometimes it's almost, some days are kind of boring. But we still talk about it because it's one of our favorite topics, right? So.
Glad. Jordy, I think the audience is probably curious as well. Like, how have you or your team developed your own comfort in talking about sex, sexuality, sexual wellness?
Yeah. So Jack had mentioned something that I'm just like, yes. When we talk about how sexual education is brought to our communities today, typically in education, right? In sexual education in school, where the narrative around that is very heteropatriarchy type of vibe, where everything is very assuming that people are cisgender, assuming that people are going to have sex simply to procreate, whatever. I do not recall ever learning about how to be a good bottom when I was in high school. I don't ever remember hearing any information that really hit home for me as a queer person. And I think about a lot of what I know today comes from community. And like, I can't stress enough as an Indigenous person how important community is. Our chosen family, our aunties, our uncles, our so on and so forth. Some of the best conversations that I've had around sex is just like sitting with my girls and like, you know, having a little chat and learning, oh, this douche worked for me, this lube worked for me, oh, I like this one best, you know. And just having those conversations in community, again, in a very like, as if it's like the most normal topic in the world, like we're talking about our favorite brand of coffee. That's where I've received the most information. And I've had the privilege of sitting, actually going and visiting sorry, I'm Nakota, I'm gonna butcher this word, but the Miopamasin Center at Ganikanichak. I went there, and it just like, I can't say enough how much it warmed my heart to see that center, to see our Indigenous languages on the wall, to see a room full of pazuda, our medicines, where you can have a cedar bath, where there's smudge available. Again, they mentioned the aunties, the grandmothers who sat there. One of them is my adopted grandmother, Gail Pruden, who has the craziest sense of humor in the world. Like, I love Gail so much. And so community, that's my answer. It's like building that sense of community and having these conversations in community is so important. And I think that we know how to talk to one another. We know how to build that relationality. We understand through our Indigenous ways of knowing and doing those important kind of steps in building relationships of reciprocity and so on and so forth. Like, we know how to build community. So I think that in saying so, it is all of our responsibilities, each and individually. It is everybody's responsibility to this work around advocacy, around education, around PrEP, so on and so forth. It is all of our responsibility, not just people living with HIV, not just people working within this sector. All of us need to come together and start having these conversations in community. And we're going to see so much change and so much beauty happen when we come together and do that as a community.
Go ahead, Shari. So we are getting a little closer to the end of our webinar. And we did have a couple questions from our audience. So I think maybe we'll just get into those. And yeah, I just, hopefully I'm not going to do these questions wrong, but thinking about community readiness and stigma around conversations around sex and sexuality in rural and remote communities, I'd be curious to hear how local contexts have been used as a way of beginning those conversations. Example, coming from somewhere that is ranching and agriculture are the main industries, I found people are very comfortable and knowledgeable talking about sex as it relates to their herds and livestock. Finding parallels is what they already know and what they're comfortable talking about in that way that has been effective in introducing parallels to offer knowledge about human sexuality and sexual health in a way that may not have otherwise been received. Sorry, it was long-winded. There's no periods. What are others' experiences? How are you doing this work in rural communities? And how are you leveraging existing things in the community to open up conversations about sex or HIV? Anyone that would like to?
If you don't mind, I'll start off. I'll keep it short and sweet. First of all, hi Lane, that's my sister, love her. And I just thought, I was texting Lane, and I was just visiting their home community, which is like such a beautiful community. I won't say which one. But Jack and Laverne touched on this during this conversation today, and that's one of our greatest strengths as Indigenous people is our humor. And when you take our and Jack had shared the link with the condoms with, you know, snagging season, so on, you know, so on and so forth. I remember seeing this sorry, this poster around it was talking about berry pickers, and in that case, berries being the male genitalia. Which is cute. So I think adding that sense of humor, which is our strength, and incorporating that in our education makes such a huge difference. And again, like I mentioned, going and visiting Ganikanijak, and seeing myself in that messaging. I don't speak Anishinaabe but seeing that language, seeing Indigenous languages incorporated, makes me want to stay engaged. So if there's any advice that I can give to any communities, it's really tailoring it to what speaks to you, what speaks to our youth, what speaks to our people. And it doesn't have to be so serious all the time. Like, let's make it fun, as Jack said.
Great. Does anyone else have anything they want to just share on that question?
I'll jump in really quick. I don't often get the opportunity to go to the rural or remote areas too often. Really just based in Winnipeg's inner city core, and love it. I think we're the first or second largest urban reserve. So works for me. But what I have been able to do is our Minapamatsuwan project. And don't worry, Jordy, I'm a language learner, and I'm probably butchering it for somebody's ears, and I apologize. But we use the dragonfly as our logo, because when dragonflies come together to mate, they make a heart. And so I've been able to use that image in introducing the work in it, that it's very natural. There's a lot of beauty in just being part of the land, and as we're connected to the land, and we're not that much different, our bodies and the land, and how, yeah, just try to remain connected in some way. But I often would use that logo and the two shapes coming together to essentially procreate, or to not even, I don't know, whatever they're doing, they're having fun is what they're having, as a way to do it. But there's a lot of other little, I think, maybe tools, but I just wanted to throw that one in.
Great. I have
Aaron, I just have like a quick little note
Yeah,
here.
please.
When it comes to like community readiness, one of the big things that I like really want to envision, and I'm pretty sure other folks have already thought about this, but when it comes to our rites of passages, ceremonies, and discussions within those, we need to have important conversations of what does quote unquote a healthy body look like? How can we have conversations around practices of sexual nature? How can we have practices or conversations of practices that are inclusive of all different genders and all different positions? That being said, I also just wanted to share this funny little note. So I'm also in a Cree class, and our Cree instructor was ever so jokingly trying to teach us a word, but someone had mispronounced it. And the way that they mispronounced it, it came out to mean there are penises everywhere. So I was like, hang on, what happens if we add wigamick? So if you have the word and you add wigamick to it, it then denotes a building. So I was like, what happens if we say Tagaw wigamick to mean bathhouse? Start having these funny conversations within communities that are relatable to them, and also really starts to pull in language keepers and knowledge keepers. And that type of like funny, inviting environment, we can start to heal through laughter, right? So please go ahead and take that word. I don't know if it's right. I don't know if it's wrong. Regardless, it's funny. Gives you a laugh.
Great. So we didn't get to all of our audience questions. We're coming close to our end here, but if you do have any burning questions from the audience, please email us, Katie, Oahas, and we'll make sure that we get you connected with the right person. And so I just had one last question I'd like to ask everyone. And what is the one thing that you want our audience to take away from what you shared today? And maybe Melissa, if I could start with you.
Yeah, I think it's just opening those conversations, really using that community readiness and just meeting people where they're at. That's a huge part of the work that I do, including the work that with the peers that I do. It's just meeting people where they're at and not leaving anyone behind. So.
And Laura, would you like to leave us with any last thoughts?
Sure. I think, as mentioned, using our 7 grandfather teachings as the basis of the work that we do, ensuring that culture is at the forefront and the education comes afterwards. And in that way, everyone is treated with love and respect and equality as they join a circle. I think that's really, really key.
Jordy, can I invite you to share any takeaways from today?
Ooh, first of all, before we wrap up and end, I just really want to thank Linda for starting us off in a good way. I should have said that at the very get-go. I do apologize for that. If there's anything that I would like to end anybody off with, I would really suggest that folks look at all of the amazing, there are so many amazing Indigenous-led initiatives happening all across these lands colonially known as Canada. We talked about Gani Kinijak today. The Two-Spirit program team at CBRC does amazing work. Anishinaabe Health, Oahas. There's so much amazing work happening. And a lot of that work is right at the grassroots level, community-based level, where we are starting to see our communities, our ceremonies, our languages really guide the work that we're doing and having peer-led initiatives. So I would just, if any advice that I can give to folks is do a little bit of research, see what's happening out there, share the work that they're doing. We talked about social media today. Share these initiatives, share these events, just get the word out. And I think that when it comes to, we talked a little bit about the lack of information around NHIB, which is how I have access to the prep that I use. And that's not something that's commonly talked about. So I use my social media and what little platform and four of the same people who like all my posts. At least that's 4 people I'm sharing, hey, I'm on prep and I receive it. It's covered through NHIB. So I would leave it at that. Let's just continue the conversation beyond this webinar and bring that conversation into our home fires.
Before I ask Laverne, I just want to say that someone's asking for emails. If you're willing, please share it in the comment section. And Laverne, would you like to give us any last thoughts on what you'd hope people take away?
Yeah, and thank you. This is a miigwech to Linda for opening as well, and to all of you. This has been such a lovely conversation and so short. So I look forward to future, because as Jordy says, there's so much amazing work happening, and it's just maybe not getting advertised. But I will say also a follow-up on that is from my years of working with youth, the youth really need these discussions to happen, because they've got a lot of questions, as do some of our elders as well. And unless we all take that responsibility to be active and speak and do this work, it's going to take all of us to shift that, and not just a few people. So yeah, just that said, when it was, I only got to briefly look at some of the comments, and there's some really great in the chat section. One of the things, there was an abstinence question that came up, and I'll just say choice, because even as much fun and great as fabulous, sex can be, and we want to promote that, the fun and the loving and the sacredness, abstinence is also definitely a choice. It's a choice for folks, and that's what it is, consent and choice. It is your life, and how you want to live it to the best way, and seeking the good life, that's up to the individual. And abstinence is a choice if that's what they want. I mean, it's up to you what brings you happiness and joy and pleasure. So as we say in the lodge, apichi gazagian, miigwech.
Miigwech, everyone. And Jack, if I can ask you for any final thoughts and takeaways?
Certainly. Kitata mihin. So thank you to each and every one of you for being here and for sharing your expertise in so many jazzy ways. Thank you, Linda, for the lovely prayer. And now that I know that particular way of doing things, I'll definitely carry it with me. I'm going to do just quick two little things. Number one, for our non-Indigenous folks who are on the call today, or who may be watching this recording, is do some research, get knowledgeable about cultures, about Indigenous cultures, because we are not pan-Indigenous people. Get to know the actual systems, the historical systems that have contributed to these high rates that we are seeing of HIV and other STBBIs within our communities. It is not simply just in this static moment that the numbers have gotten to where they are. They are from a long, long history of interactions with the Canadian colonial states. And unfortunately, the education systems to which each and every one of us have had to go through have done all of us a disservice on teaching us the real history that has happened here in Canada. Now, for my my Indigenous folks, I just want to say, like, y'all are badass Indigenous babes. And now is our time to really start to walk in the strength that we have. We are the living prayers. We are the loving blood of our ancestors who laid those pipes down, who raised them up, who signed treaties, who did all of these things, made sacrifices, did decision-making, powers, did whatever they could to try and make it better for us today. So that's why I'm so thankful to be able to sit, quote unquote, sit within this room with each and every one of you, because we understand our generational responsibilities of thinking about the 7 generations to come. So as we move forward here, I just want to reiterate to folks, as I say time and time again, is how can I be a good ancestor to those generations to come? Now, as you walk forward, walk unapologetically because you're badass. Walk unapologetically because you have those prayers within you, and walk unapologetically because we are now shifting this whole conversation, not only here in Canada, but around the world when it comes to the humanity that needs to prevail. So just thank you all so much for having me here today.
Miigwech, Jack, and thank you all. This is really amazing. Our last session is coming to an end, which is really unfortunate. But you know, since we and so I want to thank all of you who joined us on the panel today, but also over the past year, we've had some really amazing panelists, and I also want to mention them and thank them as well. And you know, throughout this webinar series, we realize there's a lot of challenges and barriers, and there's a lot of shortcomings, and so a lot has come from these conversations. And I just want to thank everyone for bringing this all to light. And we know that this work can be very challenging at times, but also extremely rewarding. And you know, we can't do this without community, and you know, without our continued learning and sharing, and really with the love. You can't do this work without the love. And so I just want to thank everyone for all the work you do, continue to do, and all the love that you share with our communities. So with that, I'm going to say miigwech, and I will pass it off to Linda to close us in a really good way. Miigwech, everyone.
Hi, everybody. I was just like touched by everything, whatever everybody was saying. My ears are open. Miigwech, creator, for that. I listened and I heard, and I hope that everybody else listened and heard. So I just invite everybody, if they have their water. I just wanted to say that when we were talking about what we were talking about, that the 7 grandfather teaching is always included in our lives, that we always touch it one way or another. And sex is another way. Humility, love, the truth about it, the courage to have sex in which way you're having sex, and the respect of it. And that's the main thing, is the respect of it all. Sex is an eye-opening decision. Knowledge is shared. Knowledge can be eye-opening, just like love is eye-opening. But it is also opening in a safe and caring way, just like everybody was talking about. knowledge and the love that we share. We protect each other. We protect our peeps, our badasses, our gookums, our gooshums, them too. You know, they have to live, they live on, and that is so awesome. But to talk about all this to the younger generations, the ones that are younger, that starts in school, but it also starts at home. And sometimes it starts with us, that we all walk alongside each other. I just want to say miigwech, Creator, for the things we have that we can share with everybody, the love that we have that keeps us going, because we want to make sure that the person beside us is always going to be safe. And for that, Creator, miigwech for letting us be here. Miigwech for letting us share. Miigwech for the sacred everythings that we have, because we are sacred. We are 90% water. So that makes us sacred. Miigwech, Creator. Miigwech. Miigwech. Oh, I just love you, Peter. I get all excited. Miigwech.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you, Katie, for hosting.